This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast dealing with the dark feminine. I'm your host, Breach Burke. This week we are going to look at the Chinese Queen Mother of the West, known as Xiwangmu. She is, technically speaking, her current attributes are very beneficent and favorable, but of course, like a lot of goddesses in many cultures, her origins are a little bit more, I'm not in the sense of being evil, but it's a little bit darker. Where she comes from, and she is an extremely old Taoist goddess. So let me talk a little bit about her attributes just to start off. So this is definitely, she's considered to be a Taoist elemental deity because she's associated with the West. I've seen her associated with metal particularly, as the Chinese elemental system is different. In the West, we look at fire, air, water, earth. In the Far East, you also have wood, metal, and I think those might be the only two that are different. But you have, there's definitely more of a sense of parts of the earth as being, there's more elements than just earth by itself. So let me talk about who she is. So it says originally she was a fearful goddess of plague. Okay, and this can remind us of some of the Greek gods, like Artemis, for example, who is associated with chastity, virginity, hunting, and her brother Apollo as well. They always tend to be associated with very, very positive things. However, they are, their actual attributes are far more complex than just, this is a good god, or this is a bad god, or they're auspicious or inauspicious. Generally speaking, Xiwangmu is considered to be an auspicious deity, but she is very fierce, the way we see in many of these protector deities. Some other descriptions of her: she whose home was on a jade mountain to the north of Kunlun, where she dwelt in a cave, sitting on a stool with her hair flowing round her. She had three green, sometimes three-footed birds that brought her food. And she later becomes the gracious and beautiful goddess of immortals and immortality. She is definitely associated with the underworld and looking over the world of the dead. And currently she's associated with the Peach Festival and peach trees. And peaches are associated in Chinese folklore and culture and thinking with the idea of immortality. She's also associated with jade, a very auspicious stone, which is also associated with immortality. So what are we going to talk about with her here? Where do we want to go with this? Immortality obviously has a connection to the underworld, but when we think of the underworld, we think of death. We think of finality. As we saw in the story of Izanami, where she is, she is a goddess, but she is actually not immortal. She's subject to death. And of course, we saw in that story, towards the end of that story, that when Izanagi, begins to throw peaches at them, at the hags and at the figure of Izanami, they retreat from that because, immortality is anathema, I guess, to those who represent mortality and the end of life. Because just as we think of it in the West as, we tend to look at, the Western religion tends to look at this, the idea of conquering death, immortal life conquering death, which I think that's a bit of a misnomer. But they are two different concepts. What is immortal is not necessarily of the same stripe as that which is subject to death. So let's talk a little bit about her. What I want to cover in this particular podcast is I want to look at her origins as the Queen Mother of the West, and her associations, how she looks, and how those associations changed over time. There's not a lot of writings about her. It's more, there's more lines interwoven in different places. There is a work called The Classic of the Mountains and the Seas, an old ancient, a very old Chinese work, and that is one of the places, it's dated variously from the 4th to 2nd centuries BCE, and she is mentioned there, of course, in connection with the mountains of the West. And the way she is described, she's described as a fierce tiger woman with tiger's teeth, a leopard's tail, and a woman's wild tangled hair. Described as presiding over catastrophes from the sky and the five destructive forces. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think even in that discussion alone, we have a lot to talk about with Xiwangmu. First, I want to talk about her connection to, first we want to talk about Taoism, actually, because not everybody, we talk about Taoist ideas or being in line with the Tao or about the yin and the yang, but there's really not a whole lot of discussion. I don't know that it's always clear to people what Taoism is or what that means. So I'm going to kind of try to give a little simple overview of Taoism and what it is, and talk a little bit about Taoist shamanism as well, because she is, as Queen Mother of the West, she is definitely a shamanic figure. And she remains one even when her attributes are shifted, and I'm going to use the phrase watered down, where she turns from, where they basically try to take the darker elements of the deity and try to sweeten them a little bit, which, there's oftentimes this is done for political or social reasons, in the same way that our depictions of the underworld tend to go from just being a gloomy place where everybody goes when they die to somehow being connected to life after death or immortality, or somehow being connected to reward and punishment. So we see this change, occurring. We see it occur in Hinduism, we see it occur in Taoism, in this case, or Buddhism, and it's not, and again, it's very funny that happens, because it definitely reflects more of a social use of religion. It's not this idea that the underworld is somehow this place of judgment. It's just basic. There's a simple fact. You're a human. You're going to die one day. And death means that consciousness leaves the body and the body rots. I mean, there's no way to really sugarcoat that, but people try to find different ways to decorrupt that or make that reality far less harsh. But I don't think we really gain anything by sweetening everything, other than trying to stave off a kind of unconscious anxiety about death, which really is one of the root problems of culture. Anyway, I'm digressing now into more philosophical territory. I would suggest that on that topic, not particularly from a Chinese point of view, but if you're interested in the topic of that shift in thinking of the underworld, look at my book, Death and the Maiden, the curious relationship between the fear of death and the fear of the feminine. I go into that extensively. And as I've said in other podcasts, it may seem self-serving to be pushing my own books, but I happen to know that my book is one of the few that actually delves into that subject. So just mentioning it. Okay. So she's the Queen Mother of the West. One source suggested that, that she may have been around as late as 1400 BCE or so. However, there's other sources that indicate she might be even older than that in terms of her attributions. There's at least one text that was from the oracle bone inscriptions from the Shang dynasty around 1766 BCE. The Shang dynasty was their dates are 1766 to 1122 BCE. So that could be 1400 years ago, but there is the possibility that she's older. So let me talk a little bit about Taoism first. Don't want to jump around too much here. Now, Taoism is a philosophical and spiritual tradition that we associate with the writer Lao Tzu. And the Tao is basically, it's a term that I think translates to the way. And Tao has to do with it's in Taoism. I'm just reading this from the simplified Wikipedia entry. The Tao is the source, pattern, and substance of everything that exists. So it's the Tao is kind of the energetic flow of everything, the flow of life, the flow of consciousness, the way living creatures move, the way nature acts. It all it deals with this Tao, okay? And the way that we achieve perfection in Taoism, of course, is to become one with that sort of unplanned rhythm of the universe. Taoism is something I've always found very interesting, and I think part of the reason it has an appeal to the West is because it is not so didactic. It's not so linear. We tend to be very much about planning and control and power and trying to assert our will over things. We have this ideas of individualism. I make my own way. Certainly in the United States and in even a lot of European countries, capitalist ideas that say, that you are, you're the rugged individual who's going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's somewhat inimical to Taoism in the sense that, you are basically going with the flow. Zen Buddhism is very Taoist in its execution and inflection because it does one thing that most other religions don't, and that is that it acknowledges and prepares you for the unpredictability of life. Things are unpredictable. You can have your checklist for the day, but 10,000 things could come in between. Maybe not 10,000, but a lot. A number of things may come in, and you may find that your entire course is derailed. And we tend to get very frustrated, and then we get upset with ourselves. Oh, I don't have control over myself. I don't have control over my schedule. I don't have control over this and that. And what is more important, and this is one of the, I hesitate to use the word goals of meditation because meditation really doesn't have a goal. But the idea, one of the things that meditation can help you accomplish is to take a distance from things to get more of a sense of that flow so that you are not, so that you don't, that you lose your sense of expectation. It's just like, okay, you can walk into a day with a general plan, and if it all goes away, somehow you end up being taken on a pathway that's where you need to be. Okay. So Taoism definitely deals with, how to perfect oneself by being in harmony with this Tao or with this flow. It says the roots of Taoism go back to the 4th century BCE. It draws its cosmological notions from the school of Yin Yang and was deeply influenced by one of the oldest texts of Chinese culture, the I Ching. And anybody who does divination is familiar with the I Ching, which is where you combine, traditionally it was throwing yarrow stalks, but there's other things. You can use coins, you can use other things to draw yin and yang lines. 6 in total, 2 trigrams, one usually the base first and then the one on top. And the way those trigrams fall indicate, where you are or not in the flow of harmony, and it advises accordingly. As they say here, it expounds a philosophical system about how to keep human nature or human behavior in accordance with the alternating cycles of nature. Taoism is the Tao Te Ching is a book attributed to Lao Tzu, and it's and also the later writings of Xiwangmu. So it's. But nonetheless, there is an entire religion. There are Taoist priests, okay? As they said, these quote-unquote masters of the Tao, attributed only to clergy and not to followers, take care to note distinction between their ritual tradition and the practices of Chinese folk religion and non-Taoist vernacular ritual orders, which are often mistaken as pertaining to Taoism. Chinese alchemy, Chinese astrology, Zen Buddhism, several martial arts, traditional Chinese medicine, feng shui, and many styles of qigong have been intertwined with Taoism through history. And I would imagine one of the chief martial arts would have been Aikido, the way of avoidance, would be certainly one of them. I think all of the martial arts have an element of that. Reiki, which I practice, it's not particularly, actually that's more of a Japanese practice, but It's based on the similar principles of energy flow. So Taoist tradition is one of the 5 religious doctrines officially recognized by the People's Republic of China, and is a major religion in Taiwan, particularly Hong Kong, Macau, and Southeast Asia. Okay, so that's just an overview of what Taoism is. Okay, so let's talk about this Queen Mother of the West, now that we have an idea that she is a Taoist spirit and a Taoist figure. So she has other names in other countries, and I don't know if I'm going to say these correctly, but in Japan she's known as, I don't know if that's Saibo. It's Seiobo is how it's transliterated, with a long mark over the O, or if it's Saiobo, I'm not going to pretend that I know how to say that correctly. And I think it's Xiwangmu in Korea, and I think it's also, this is Chthonia Mao in Vietnam. Okay. So this Queen Mother of the West is referred to in these different Southeast Asian cultures in these ways. She has numerous titles, one being Golden Mother of the Jade, or the Turquoise Pond. Sometimes she is known as the Lady Queen Mother. And in the maternist current of Chinese salvationist religions, that's got to be interesting, she's the main deity called upon as the Eternal Venerable Mother. Okay, so as I mentioned, the first mention of the Queen Mother of the West dates back to this oracle bone inscription, and it reads, "Crack making on day 9, the 9th day, we divined. If we make offering to the Eastern Mother and to the Western Mother, there will be approval." Okay. Now, this idea of Eastern and Western Mother, certainly in the original texts, the idea was that the Eastern and Western Mother were partners. You don't see the Western Mother partnered with a man. You see her partnered with another female deity, who apparently is now in obscurity, called the Eastern Mother. And that makes sense. If you think of the West as being the place of sunset, in many cultures, the West is also the realm of the dead and the underworld, or the edge of things. In this case, maybe the realm of heaven, but it's also the realm of the underworld. And it would make sense, though, that the Western Mother would be partnered with the Eastern Mother as they work together for the flow of day and night. Okay. It says the exact nature of mother divinities in Shang Dynasty is unclear, but they were seen as powerful forces deserving of ritual by people of the Shang Dynasty. Certainly, because they're elemental and cosmical forces. Ancient religion is based very much on understanding and working with the flow of natural forces. In Near Eastern religion, like we see in Greece, Rome, Mesopotamia, those areas, you have a system of appeasing these deities through sacrifice, and through basically you have oracles to try to tell you whether the gods are pleased or displeased with your actions, and you make remedies accordingly. Even in Vedic astrology in India, things in your astrological chart that are inauspicious, again, there's certain remedies that one takes, whether it's the reciting of certain mantras or doing certain pujas or things like that. So there's always this idea of having you have this idea of the corrective. But nonetheless, she is a powerful force. Now, as I mentioned, she's a ferocious goddess with teeth of a tiger who sends pestilence down to the world. But again, later on, she becomes goddess of life and immortality. Now, Xiwangmu is one of the, Changji, I think, am I saying that name right? Chuangzi, I think that's right. When the transliteration isn't always helpful. One of the earliest written references to the Queen Mother comes from this Taoist writer from about the 4th century. The Queen Mother of the West obtained it, meaning the Tao, and took up her seat at Shaoquang. No one knows her beginning, and no one knows her end. Okay, so that she reminds me of a Devi kind of a force in Hinduism, where the gods encounter the great Devi, and they can't say what she is or where she comes from, but they just know she's more powerful than any of them. But there's no explanation there. She's just there, in the same way that things associated with that, the secrets in life and death, they're just there. There's no explaining why they're there. In all of these mythologies, you don't see this idea of, oh, everybody lived forever, then you did a terrible thing, and now we don't live forever. This is the idea that this is just always the way it's been. This is part of the flow of things. Another very healthy attitude, in my opinion, because too frequently, we like to pretend that death is somehow not a natural part of life. Okay, now during the Tang Dynasty, which was about the year 618 to 907, and that's in the Common Era, that's now, poetry flourished throughout China, and this is periods commonly known as the Golden Age of Chinese poetry. It was during this period the Queen Mother became an extremely popular figure in poetry. Her mythology was recorded in the poems of the Quan Tangxi, a collection of surviving poems from the Tang Dynasty. And then there was a Taoist master, a Shangqing Taoist master and court chronicler named Du Guangting, who wrote a hagiographical biography of the Queen Mother, and this represents the most complete source about the Tang society's perception of Xiwangmu. So she is most often depicted holding court with her palace on the mythological Mount Kunlun, supposed to be in western China, and there's a modern Mount Kunlun named after this. Her palace is believed to be a perfect and complete paradise where it was used as a meeting place for deities and a cosmic pillar where communications between deities and humans were possible. And that reminds us of the story in the Japanese story of Izanami and Izanagi, who build this palace with this same kind of heavenly pillar that connects heaven and earth. So we see a similarity there. At her palace, she was surrounded by female retinue of prominent goddesses and spiritual attendants. Although not definite, there are many beliefs that her garden had a special orchard of longevity peaches, which would ripen every 3,000 years. Others believe that her court on Mount Kunlun was nearby to the orchard of the peaches of immortality, which we could draw a comparison there with the apples of the Hesperides in the West, in Greek mythology, which are supposedly a wedding gift to the goddess Hera. No matter where the peaches were located, the Queen Mother is widely known for serving peaches to her guests, which would then make them immortal. Okay. And so we see these aspects of her. We see most of the accounts that we have of her show her as this benevolent figure bestowing immortality or bestowing this kind of auspiciousness. But let's talk a little bit about some of her other attributes. Now, I'm reading this from a blog, actually a blog called Occult World. But this I'm just going to quote just a little bit here. It says so he mentions that she is the Xiwangmu is the ultimate yin, the essence of female power. I can say that she is associated with the tiger, which is a yang figure, okay, which is masculine. Yang is masculine, yin is feminine. And so, the idea of a tiger, a female deity being represented by a tiger, however, she's represented often by the white tiger, which is a yin figure, okay? And she's the ultimate essence of female power, which would, again, make her akin, again, that gives her a very Shakti kind of quality, the idea that she is somehow connected to that very consciousness that deals with life and death. And it says here, he says, her associations with the West are no coincidence. In China, west of the wild frontier is the direction of paradise, mysticism, mystery, and danger. Xiwangmu is a goddess of alchemy, shamanism, magic, and esoteric, hard-won wisdom. The creatures with which she's closely associated, tigers, magpies, crows, and foxes, all have profound associations with magic and sorcery. Yeah, and I would add there that they're all trickster figures as well. And again, one of the things about the trickster archetype is the fact that it deals with unpredictability. The way in which, we tend to, the way in which, we kind of trip our way through life in spite of our plans. And when we're too rigidly planned, it's like we're not living at all. So, there are these tricksters that remind us not to take life too seriously, and also that, let us know that we're not in control and that we don't know everything. So he mentions the same description that I had mentioned earlier about her with tiger's teeth, leopard's tail, etc. And in this particular blog, we're talking about how she may have been the deified tribal ancestress and shamanic leader of a northwestern tribal people, perceived by the Chinese as exceedingly ferocious, thus the tiger image. So, and also he mentions here that that they think the change in Xiwangmu was due to the rise of Confucianism. And Confucianism is a system that's very much based on societal role, the idea of that you playing your proper role in society, particularly within the family. Like the mother has a certain role, the father has a certain role, the son has a certain role, the daughter has a certain role. Like this idea of your role is what defines your that's what creates the perfect society, is everybody perfectly playing out their role. And that maybe within this context as well, that we see Xiwangmu losing more of her shamanic aspects and making her more of this as he says here, an elegant regal queen. So this indicates, he mentions that she was credited with ending a huge drought in the 3rd century BCE. And Confucianism, it says here that they actively ridiculed and attacked shamanism, which might not be totally surprising, because if you're basing on something that's very, very solidly structured, shamanism has to do with entering dream states, moving into other spaces, dream interpretation, astrology, has to do with all of those things in terms of determining the harmony of the universe. And similarly, you see religions that tend to be more codified, more conventional, more rule-bound, as rejecting shamanistic ideas. So that's not, So I'm not totally surprised that we to see that about Confucianism. Now just moving over to another blog by somebody written by Max Dashu. He talks about Xiwangmu as living in the Kunlun Mountains, and that the peach tree is a cosmic axis that connects heaven and earth, a ladder traveled by spirits and shamans. Okay, so this is how he draws all of that together. And of course, that's what the shaman does in any culture. They're the bridge between this world and whatever we consider the other world to be. And of course, in societies that doesn't believe in the other world, or tries to minimize the other world, or if a belief in spirits is more ridiculed, then these, of course, methods and attitudes are considered to be archaic. But I don't really believe that they've left our culture. I'm just going to say that. We talk about synchronicity, the idea of meaningful coincidence. We talk about the ways in which, we set out to do one thing and somehow we end up doing something totally different, and we think, there is an underlying flow of life. We may think that we've rationalized it and science controls it, and that we know, all the details and so forth. But the reality is we don't live that way. Our psyches are not programmed that way. And we would do well to recognize that. I think, instead of trying to, beat everything down with our methods of the way that we think, we can improve on the way the brain works, or the way, the way our behaviors are. I think we would be better off to just recognize the fact that there are these things. There is irrationality in the personality. Okay, so back to Xiwangmu controls cosmic forces, time and space, and the pivotal Great Dipper constellation. With powers of creation and destruction, she ordains life and death, disease and healing, determines the lifespan of all living beings. Okay, that makes her like one of the fates, which are also very ancient. Energies of new growth surround her like a cloud. She's attended by a host of spirits and transcendentals. She presides over dead and afterlife, and confers divine realization and immortality on spiritual seekers. Okay. And he notes here that Wangmu was not a title for royal women. It means grandmother. Okay. So if we think about what we've been saying about hags, now she's not portrayed as a hag, but this idea of this wise female figure, the grandmother figure, this puts her in a little bit more of a positive spin. Though we're going to talk about the tiger aspect in a minute. Wangmu was used as an honorific for female ancestors. And the ancient commentator Guo Pu explained that one adds Wang in order to, or Wang, I think is pronounced, in order to honor them. So So he also mentions the same texts that we saw elsewhere. And the classic of the mountains and seas in the second chapter says she lives on Jade Mountain, resembles a human but has tiger's teeth and a leopard's tail, and wears a head ornament on top of her wild hair. Some scholars interpret this as a victory crown. Most think it is the Sheng headdress shown in earliest reliefs of the goddess, a horizontal band with circles or flares at either end. And is often a symbol of the loom, which one uses to weave. And that makes sense, really, because weaving is it's a very feminine metaphor for life. We tend to think of the hero myth on the masculine side, but this was a discussion I'd had in grad school once, was the idea of the weaver as representing a very more feminine view of navigating your way through life, because you're taking disparate threads and trying to weave them into some kind of a narrative or picture. So, so the loom is actually a very, very powerful symbol. Okay, so the Shan Haijing goes on to say of the tigress-like Xiwangmu, she is controller of the grindstone and the 5 shards, constellations of the heavens. The grindstone is where the axial tree connects to heaven, and the womb point from which creation is churned out, okay, kind of like an omphalos or a navel. In other translations of this passage, she presides over the calamities of heaven and the 5 punishments. The goddess has destructive power. She can cause epidemics, for example, but she also averts them and cures disease. Well, now we know who you had to appeal to about COVID, right? But they said she excels at whistling, too, or fond of roaring or good at screaming. Those are the different translations there. And the character in question, they said, I think it's pronounced Chow. It does not, I could be saying that wrong, it does not translate easily. But it has to do with a clear, prolonged sound that issues from the throats of sages and shamans. Okay. Okay, I just want to see if there's anything else new in here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tiger aspect of her. Let me find that. Okay, here we go. The tiger is, they again, mentioning here, the tiger is, first of all, the tiger is the 3rd symbol in the Chinese zodiac. Okay, so the tiger does appear in their zodiacal representations. Represents the masculine principle in nature, king of all the animals, as shown by the 4 stripes on his forehead, which form the character Wang or king. The tiger is regarded as one of the 4 super-intelligent creatures, along with dragon, phoenix, and the tortoise. And those have been motifs in Chinese art. The tiger is associated with the direction of the west, so there we go. Therefore, we're not surprised of the association of the Queen Mother of the West. Now, each company, so, and in this case, it's the white tiger that rules the West. So that goes back to what we were saying about, even though the tiger is yang, the white tiger tends to be represented as a yin figure. So that all fits together. In southern China, women worship the white tiger on March 6th. The second moon in the lunar calendar. They place paper images of the tiger at home to keep away rats and snakes and to prevent quarrels. Okay. In Chinese folktales, tigers kill evil men and protect good men. Tiger charms are used to keep away disease and evil, and babies are given colorfully embroidered tiger shoes for protection. And the tiger claw amulet is believed to ward off sudden fright and give the wearer courage of the tiger. Tiger tends to be associated with courage and confidence. You might think of the element of the strength card in the tarot. Even though you have a lion represented there, the tiger tends to represent that. And I can't help but thinking about protective goddesses like Taweret in the Egyptian, who have these very benevolent aspects. Although it is to be said that even though she is called Queen Mother of the West, that mother is more, again, like grandmother, an honorific title, but we don't necessarily see her acting the role of mother. Nonetheless, that fierce protector element indicates that she displays that quality of the Dark Mother, that she is a fierce protector. Okay. But tigers are considered to be enemies of evil spirits, especially those who torment the dead. Okay, so there's a protective role, kind of like we saw with Maman Brigitte, the one who who takes care of the dead, perhaps passing judgment, but you don't really get the strong, even though she's in charge of punishments, you don't necessarily get the strong idea of punishment here. Although, again, most of what's been written about her was written by the time she was associated with these milder things. So it says, on the death of a tiger, it was believed its spirit would enter the earth and become amber. Okay, that's interesting. 5 types of tigers balance the energy of the cosmos, preventing the universe from chaos. Black tiger governs the water element and rules during winter season. Blue tiger governs the earth element and rules during spring. Red tiger governs the fire element and rules during summer, and white tiger governs the metal element and rules during autumn. Yellow tiger rules all other tigers and symbolizes the sun. Okay, so the white tiger, yeah, that fits in with this personification, or this of the Queen Mother of the West. We see these definite connections to the tiger. So what we have here is a protective dark mother figure, and it's interesting because we look at it in the Taoist context. She's a yin figure, but we tend to associate yin with passivity, and we think of yang as the active principle. But I think there's a lot more to yin than there's not. You can't, even though it's dualistic, you can't draw a straight line between the qualities of yang and the qualities of yin. And if she represents the ultimate or the core yin, as it's been suggested, then she is, then again, she is a Shakti-like figure, which is, it just is. It's just the essence of things. It's ferocious, it's powerful, it can be protective, it's immortal, and it has to do with life, with the very life force and with death, with the ki or the chi. And so it's not a surprise that she has gone away as a figure, but as there seems to be more emphasis, again, more of this bringing of the rule-based things. I talk about this a lot with the way the Romans and the Jews in particular, the way that their religious systems tended to be very much driven by certain rules and things that needed to be they're very, very strict rules for different groups of people and for priestly classes and for things like that, there's this very, very strict set of rules and guidelines. Once you start bringing that into a spiritual and religious system, you tend to get away from the shamanic elements because they are more chaotic. So we don't have too much information about her. Like, there's no specific story I can tell you about her, as a shamanic figure. What we have is the description of her voice. We see what she's represented in ancient oracles, and we know that there was this connection between a mother of the East and the mother of the West, which is, which sort of, which keeps these things in balance, but it's a balance on the feminine scale. It's not, she does not, you don't see here anything about her being paired with any kind of a masculine element in particular, though as one of the elemental, representing one of the elemental directions, or the force of metal, she is, she's one of the aspects, but it's that's suggestive of the idea that aspect is more yin oriented. Okay, if that makes sense. I think that's all I want to say about Xiwangmu. It's a little bit, I feel like I'm a little bit all over the place with it, but it's because I don't have a specific story about her to tell other than the narratives that I've just read to you. And I'm focusing a little less on her role in immortality because I'm more interested in the idea that she was this shamanic figure. And as we see, this seems to happen over and over again with the figures that we examine on this podcast, is that they start out as these, they start out as these much darker figures associated with more destructive elements, and then over time, they're either turned into demons or they're somehow morphed into these softer ideas that are more in line with this more proper obedient idea of feminism. It doesn't, I'm not suggesting it entirely takes away their power, but that change in inflection does tend to minimize that darker element that we really need to look at. You can't discount that. It's part of things. And to discount the shamanic role too. I mean, we don't deal well. We like nice, neat categories. We don't deal well when we're stuck on the boundary or when we have to cross boundaries, or if we move into unfamiliar territory. But it's part of everybody's life. There's nobody who gets away with not doing that unless they live a completely and totally sheltered life. And then I would argue you haven't lived your life. So, another interesting manifestation of this rather complex feminine force that generally is seen as auspicious, but has this side that certainly those who practice, say, Buddhist Tantra and other, in certain Taoist shamanism, which is a thing, that she would definitely be an important deity for those groups. Thanks again for listening this week. Please check out Chthonia.net for all of my work. And if you would like to support my work, please visit patreon.com/Chthonia. I'm on social media as Chthonia on YouTube, Chthonia Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. It's 2 words on Twitter and Instagram. 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram. So if you're not following, definitely check it out to keep abreast of the newest episodes. Thanks again to my wonderful patrons for all your support, and I will see you in the next episode.